The proceeding will start shortly. 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 The proceeding will start shortly.
Order. Can I welcome our panel of witnesses today to this Home Affairs Select Committee evidence session as part of our ongoing inquiry into hate crime. Could I just briefly ask the panel to each introduce yourselves and the role that you play within your organisation? Ms Minchell.
My name is Katie Minchell. I'm Head of UK Government, Public Policy and Philanthropy at Twitter.
Thank you. Mr. Potts.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Neil Potts. I'm Public Policy Director at Facebook with oversight of the development and implementation of our community standards. Those are the policies that we enforce to remove content on our platform. I also oversee the Strategic Response Team, which is a team that focuses on crisis response and coordination throughout the company.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Marco Pancini. I lead the Public Policy Team for YouTube in Europe, Middle East and Africa. I have an experience of 12 years at Google and now YouTube working on safety issues, and previously I was working in the internet industry at eBay, still working on safety.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your time today. I'd like to start with the Christchurch attack, obviously a vile attack in which people were murdered and injured. And the killer live-streamed his murders as terrorist propaganda. You've all accepted that. I think you have all agreed that it should not be on your platforms, but versions of the video were still on each of your platforms many hours after the killings took place. And there are reports in the New Zealand media this morning that some of those videos are still available and have been found on Facebook and YouTube and Instagram. Given that you have all told us many times before about the systems that you have in place to take down terrorist material, why have your systems failed so badly in this case? And perhaps we could start with Facebook.
Thank you, Chair. First, I would like to say that our hearts at Facebook go out to the victims of the tragedy, both in New Zealand and the recent Easter tragedy in Sri Lanka. In the case of New Zealand, first and foremost, our priority was to help the New Zealand law enforcement, and we did that immediately after by sending members of our law enforcement response team to be on the ground to support the investigation. I will like to point out that we were able to remove the content of the video within 10 minutes after the video was flagged to us by New Zealand law enforcement. But what we saw was over 800 variants of that video appear on the platform. Within the first 24 hours, we were able to remove 1.5 million different copies. 1.2 at the initial stages of upload using our automated technology, and an additional 300,000. Unfortunately, we recognized that this was an adversarial space. The attacker used a network of his friends or colleagues on a separate platform, 8chan in this case, to spread this, to make it go viral. They deliberately chose to be adverse to our policies, adverse to our systems. They used things like splicing and cutting of the video. They used things like filters to subvert our automation. Now, our automation is strong. We were able to immediately upload and share with our fellow colleagues here as members of the Global Internet Forum for Counterterrorism. But automation isn't perfect. While it learns, it does have difficulty understanding different filters, different angles of the same video, different use of audio technology. We realize this is an adversarial space. We want to make it hostile. But it is the case that as more variants come online, they may appear on our platform. But to date, we have shared with these companies as well as others within the GIF-CT I believe, over 800, almost 900 variants of that video today.
So do you think there are still versions of that video on your platform now?
Chair, it's hard for me to say. I think we're doing an excellent job of removing it. The machine learning does learn over time. So as we see a video, it can teach itself of what to look for. Is there a possibility that one video exists that has changed audio, a different filter, a different angle? It's possible. I'm unfamiliar with seeing those copies. I know we're doing a lot of work and investment there, but it is possible.
So if the Global Intellectual Property Enforcement Centre that's reported in the New Zealand media this morning is referring to having found videos on your platform, are you aware of that and have you taken those down?
Sure, I'm not aware of that, but if I will definitely follow up with you and also make sure my teams follow up with those folks in New Zealand to identify those copies, and we will remove them and then also add them to our what we call our hash database and share them with the companies at this table.
The difficulty that we have with this is that this is an issue that we have raised with all of you many times before, and this issue about uploading, re-uploading, taking a screenshot of it. Surely this is not new. Surely you have been aware of this as a problem when it comes to dealing with child abuse images, when it comes to dealing with Islamist jihadi propaganda, with all kinds of other videos and propaganda. I cannot believe that Christchurch was the first time you had people attempt to game your system.
Chair, I'm sure. This is not the first time that people have tried to subvert our system. That's correct. And in many cases, our systems are able to function very efficiently and remove the content. This time was unique because of the use of the live platform, the first-person perspective that the shooting took, as well as media sharing many copies of this and people then filming it with their phones, which created its own set of issues. We're committed to investing into our artificial intelligence, our machine learning, our automation to surface and remove these videos as quickly as possible. But there is still progress to be made with machine learning. It is not perfect. It's not infallible today.
But you've had live streams again before where you've had problems with this. This is not the first time you've had a live stream video that has been a problem.
That is correct, Chair. But to be clear, this is the first time unfortunately, events like Christchurch are very rare. So this is the first case that we have seen this type of activity. It does take a machine multiple times, thousands of times even, to recognize what type of violence, what type of imagery it is seeing so it can learn from itself and then enact our proper policies.
So again, what other organisations say is that you refuse help from outside organisations, that you don't invest enough money in this kind of thing, and that's why you've still got such a problem with being unable to take it down fast enough.
I would strongly object to that, Chair. We have made significant investments since the last time we've appeared before your committee. My colleague Simon Milner, I believe, appeared in 2017. 3 areas where we have made just tremendous amount of investments and resources are in our people. We are now over 30,000 people that work on safety and security. Many of those subject matter experts that rate the policies, that have law enforcement, intelligence, and other backgrounds that study counterterror. We have over 15,000 content moderators now. And importantly, we have a full suite of engineers that focus directly on these issues to build out our product. The second part is our product, our artificial intelligence automation. Again, it's not perfect. We have made significant investment, but it will take time for artificial intelligence to improve. Not infallible, but it is a big lever for us to pull and leverage against this type of harmful content. And third is our partnerships. Again, with companies like those at the table in the GIFT-CT, we're committed to that, but we also work with a full variety of external advisors, academics, civil society, NGOs, as well as government. So we realize that these are tremendous problems and we need to take all those measures to combat it.
But again, given that we've been raising this issue with you for some time, it is just very hard to see why something as basic as just re-editing it or splicing it and so on should cause you such problems. In March of 2017, we raised, admittedly this started as a YouTube issue, we first raised the issue about national action videos. In December, which was clearly illegal far-right extremist propaganda, when in December of that same year we raised again with YouTube the fact that that video kept appearing. We were told in an evidence session that all 3 of your companies were represented at. They are sometimes manipulated, so you have to work out how they are manipulated in order to take news versions down. We're now looking at removing them faster. I think we'll be closing that gap with the help of machines. I raised that particularly with Simon Milner at that time as well. We raised it again with William McCants at YouTube in March 2018, who said sometimes when there's a variation, the technology will not automatically take it down, we'll send it for review. This hashing technology was developed years ago, and we have been raising this issue about people trying to game the system for years with you now, and that is why it is so hard to believe that this was so difficult for you still to deal with, and the way in which you talk about it suggests, well, that this was just a new thing you had to deal with in the awful circumstances of Christchurch. Mr. Potts?
I want to be clear. The thematic overview of these issues is not new. These challenges have existed, and we have worked and invested heavily to to remedy these issues on our platform to combat this type of hate. This instance of the video, this type of video, was a new type of video. We had not seen that before, or our machine learning had not seen that before. Therefore, it is harder for our machine learning to
Why was it a new type of video?
This was a first-person, essentially, and not to be too glib about it, it's a first-person shooter video, one where we have someone using a GoPro helmet with a camera focused from their perspective of shooting. Now, if we had different angles where this was a third-party video that shows it, perhaps our systems would have been faster, because we have seen that type of content before. We have not seen the content from the actual angle of the shooter, the attacker in that situation.
Okay, but so everybody knew within a very short time of this happening, you knew in a very short time of this happening that this was a huge shooting attack, a criminal attack, and a terrorist attack. So that was known very quickly.
That's correct.
So I don't understand why the angle of the camera was significant in terms of you then being able to take down all of the material, the uploads and the re-uploads.
I want to be clear, Chair, that once we were made aware of the video, we took that video down extremely quickly. Within 10 minutes, we immediately banked that video. Bank is the term that we use to uploading to our database, sharing with our partners. That is one variant. So that variant, the variant from the shooter's perspective, we were very fast to get that. Other variants that did not resemble the exact shooter's perspective, that we had the exact hash or digital fingerprint, made it more difficult. So if you turn those angles at certain ways, you dub over soundtracks, you add filters, that will subvert our system to some degree. Now the systems will learn, and they will learn very quickly, but there is still time. In this space, again, because of those members on 8chan, they purposefully uploaded many copies, not only to Facebook, they uploaded them to YouTube, they uploaded them to Twitter, with the purpose of spreading it wide. They uploaded them to message sharing sites that I've never heard of, with the intention of just making those things spread and go viral.
Okay.
By doing that, it does present a challenge to any AI.
Okay, I think it is just very difficult to understand why, when these same issues were being raised directly with you by us, and if we were raising them in the very infrequent select committee hearings that we had with you, I can't believe that a whole load of other people, including police and law enforcement, weren't raising this with you far more frequently. So it's still very hard to understand why this should take so long to develop the technology to address it. But can I ask you, because you just referred then to the people who were deliberately doing so, have you identified all of the users who were doing that, and have they been banned from Facebook?
We have identified obviously the shooter, and he's been banned from Facebook. We have identified and removed content from users who were sharing. We do not have direct links back at this time to people who were perhaps within his core set of individuals on that 8chan system to share it, but we have removed numbers of individuals who were sharing it as well. So
you've removed all of the individuals who were deliberately sharing and kind of uploading, changing in order to gain your system. Sheryl Sandberg has talked about a community of bad actors. Have you identified all of those people, and have you banned them from Facebook? We have identified some people and banned them from Facebook. There were also people who uploaded, I want to be clear, there were people who uploaded videos that were shared by bad actors. So a bad actor shares the video, someone else downloads that video, but without the intention of knowing that they're being a bad actor, they upload that, and then we just apply our normal penalties. Where we remove the video, they get certain escalating penalties, but they were not necessarily removed from Facebook. Okay, but you have removed the people who you think were doing so deliberately? We have removed, yes. And have you reported them to the police? We are working closely with the New Zealand law enforcement. Have you reported them to the police? It's an active investigation, ma'am. I want to respect the investigation. I'm not a lawyer for the company. The reason that this is significant is because we've been told by the Counter-Terror Chief, Commander Neil Basu here, that very often the social media companies do not report to the police incidents which are clearly involved breaking the law. That although you might remove content, that you don't refer it to the police. So that's why I think this is a significant question about whether or not you have referred information to the police about individuals who were deliberately uploading in order to spread terrorist propaganda. Yes, Chair. Just to want to point out that we do work closely with law enforcement.
If there is an imminent threat of harm or risk, we do refer those things proactively to law enforcement. So I'm not familiar with the chief or the person you mentioned in his statement, but we do refer to law enforcement in many cases of imminent threat. We also respond to requests for data and information when we receive proper legal process. That is, I believe, happening in New Zealand, and we are responding. I don't have the information of exactly what we have shared with them at this time.
Okay,
and the investigation's
so just in terms of
ongoing.
your policies, if you identify illegal content, so not simply content that violates your standards, but illegal content, perhaps it might be a death threat, perhaps it might be the sharing of terrorist propaganda, and so on, that you rightly remove, do you also report that to the law enforcement in that country? And Neil Basu, by the way, is Assistant Commissioner Neil Basu, who is the head of counter-terrorism for the Metropolitan Police and for the whole country in this country.
Okay, I apologize for not knowing him. We do. So in the case that we are, I won't say certain, but we think that there is an imminent threat of harm, of physical harm, we do refer those. So whether that's terrorism, whether that is other types of crime, whether that's a threat against, unfortunately, members of this body have received threats, whether it's a threat against an individual, private individual, we will refer that to local law enforcement in hopes that they will intervene.
Okay, and that is where there's life or limb risk. But if there isn't, if the actual simply the posting of a video or something itself is in itself an illegal act, so it is the promotion of terrorist propaganda, would you report that to the police?
I think those are case specific. It's hard to answer in the hypothetical. If it is just one posting of a piece of propaganda, I would say we most likely would not. We do investigations, but if we find that the person is somehow connected to an organization and or contemplating some other larger scale attack, we would then refer it.
Sure, but there is a criminal threshold involved, so the actual the material itself might pass a criminal threshold. So I'm not asking you about, I understand you will have policies, very sensible policies around where people, there is an imminent risk. I'm asking you those situations where there is not imminent risk, there nevertheless, in that country will be evidence that a crime has been committed. Would you refer that to the police?
Chair, I think it would depend on the crime. If we understood what crime was being committed, there are obviously different scales of crimes that are criminal.
Okay, a crime's a crime.
That's fair. I think there are misdemeanors. There are obviously capital crimes as well.
Okay, a misdemeanor, okay, if it's not a crime, it's not a crime, and I wouldn't expect you to report it. I'm just trying to understand whether Facebook reports crimes on your platform to the police.
We do not report all crimes to the police. We do report those imminent threats again, and we do respond to requests for information about crime.
Okay, and how do you decide what counts then as a crime? And who are you to decide what's a crime that should be reported and what's a crime that shouldn't be reported on your platform?
We have a very developed process. We have teams that come from law enforcement backgrounds, FBI. We have people who worked in the UK law enforcement and globally in other law enforcement agencies to help us develop those processes, where we then create our own threshold, a credible threshold of what we believe is imminent, and then we will pass that on. But to be frank, I know part of this hearing is to discuss potential regulation and oversight from government. These are areas where there are tough decisions and decisions that we are making on our own, that these companies here are making on our own. And these are places where government can give us more guidance and more scrutiny about what we should be sharing.
Okay. Turn to Twitter. So how long did it take you to remove the copies of this video?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for inviting Twitter to testify. The effort is ongoing. So far, we've removed 26,700 tweets. We first should state that the video was not uploaded to Twitter in its original form. You cannot, as an average user, upload a video of more than 2 minutes and 20 seconds. Like other companies, we saw multiple variants of the video. We saw 300 different copies on our platform. But similar to Facebook, we removed the perpetrator's account before the New Zealand police asked us to and before he was arrested.
And what have you done to be able to identify different versions and different variants of this video? Or have you simply relied on Facebook or others to tell you which are the different variants?
Yeah, I think there's a few things here. First, Brad Smith wrote a blog for Microsoft that puts it very well. There are two big lessons learned for all of us. The first is exactly this issue. We all need to get better at identifying different variations of this content, and that has to be a priority. And second of all, the importance of a crisis response or command centre was another learning, I think, that the GIFCT that we all work through was set up principally for programmatic work. It's effective with things like research and tech innovation and hash database. And on the day, while we were able to respond to the emergency and set up a specific repository for Christchurch content, I think we all felt that it wasn't particularly process-driven, and that a priority for all of us is to look at something like a command centre for the future.
You see, the trouble is it's when you talk about learning lessons, is it feels like, you know, if we have been raising this with you, 18 months ago, we were explicitly raising this issue of deliberate attempts to change videos and so on to be able to raise them again. It is so difficult to understand why this was a shock to you all when it happened in this case. Why are you always so reactive?
I think for Twitter specifically, because of the limits on video length, we tend to see URLs being shared rather than the original content. So something we have done over the past year is set up a different database for URLs. And that's, you know, when we add something to the database, we can all proactively surface that content on our platform. So in thinking about different versions of videos, that's part of this effort in trying to think about how the video is emerging on different platforms in different locations.
And have you made efforts to identify the people who were deliberately spreading this terrorist propaganda on your platform?
Yeah, I think it's a really difficult challenge. I mean, the first thing I should say is we did our own analysis at Twitter, and we found that 70% of the video views were shared by 62 verified accounts, so kind of traditional media outlets. So I think there's a learning there in terms of our partnership with the wider media ecosystem on the day, which Neil Basu has raised. I think the other thing is, to come back to your point on working with the police, you know, on the morning of the attack, I was at a police conference running a training session to guide police officers in how they can make requests to Twitter for data. We were having meetings with the College of Policing to think about how we can scale that across the country, and with NTAC to discuss the upcoming implementation of the Cloud Act. So we do take very seriously the partnership we have with law enforcement and the concerns they raise.
So 30% were not the main, was it mainstream media, the 70%?
Yeah.
So, and so what discussions have you had with them?
This is something I raised with the Home Office on the morning of the attack and in discussion since, and we would welcome opportunities to be part of that discussion. But, you know, like Mr. Potts was talking about, we saw users inadvertently breaking our rules, sharing content, condemning what happened, and expressing solidarity with the victims. So, you know, I think there's another bit of this on our part to clarify our rules and provide greater understanding to our users about those issues when they may inadvertently break the rules and the actions we will take.
So have you made an effort to distinguish between people who were thoughtlessly sharing in order to condemn, or media, mainstream media, who were again making a very poor editorial judgment that they later changed, and those who were deliberately promoting it in the same way that Facebook talk about those who were deliberately promoting it in order to escalate and promote terrorist material? Have you made that distinction, and have you tried to identify those who were doing it deliberately to spread terrorist propaganda?
We are in the midst of our own internal review, and I will of course keep the committee updated. But, you know, to come back to the point about terrorist content on our platforms, Twitter has now removed 1.4 million accounts for the promotion of terrorism. And I think the director of the FBI was asked this, you know, would you like platforms to give you that data set? And it's complicated, you know, already. Terrorism is often described as trying to find the needle in the haystack, and the last thing we want to do is provide a great deal more hay. So that's very much a question for law enforcement.
Well, isn't the reality of your problem is that actually, even if you were willing to do this, it wouldn't really make any difference because you don't know who any of those people are because of your policies on anonymity?
Like I said, we work closely with the police, and when they make requests to us for information, we can provide
I know, but I'm not asking about when you react. I'm asking about if there were people on your platform who were deliberately spreading terrorist propaganda, whether you are able to identify them and to report them.
We're in a similar position
yes or no?
to Facebook, that if there is a threat to life,
I'm not asking about threat. I'm asking about
police.
whether you are capable of identifying people who may be spreading terrorist propaganda on your platforms.
Like I said, when there is a threat to life, we will reach out to law enforcement where we have relationships.
Okay, I'm not asking about whether there's a threat to life. I'm asking about people who are spreading terrorist propaganda, who are breaking the law, whether or not you are capable of identifying them and reporting them to the police. Are you capable of doing so, yes or no?
There are plenty of signals we can use that I'd rather not go into in a public setting, but I'm very happy to follow up with the chair after this session.
That would be very helpful. YouTube. Can I ask you what you did to take down material, and also whether you believe, as reported in the New Zealand media today, there are still such videos from the Christchurch shooting on your platform?
Thank you, Chair. I will not repeat some of the things that were already mentioned by my colleagues, but indeed there are three elements that were very important on the day. First and foremost, the use of our algorithms, the use of our machines. We invested a lot in that, and I think that in terms of capturing the original video, the machine did their job. Because once we got from the law enforcement the original video, we were able to hash the video and identify the video and block the same video. In relation to the re-upload, and we are talking about, at the end of the day, something like 200,000 pieces of content that we took down. The challenge was, as was said by Katie, also the presence in the different upload of pieces of the video of authoritative sources. What we learned from that, and this is like the second big improvement that we made also in terms of for the future to change our policies, is to make sure that if there is a match now of the same pieces of video uploaded on the platform, instead of going up online, this goes directly for review. And so I would like to look into this piece of news that I'm not aware of, to try to better understand how it's possible that still pieces of the video identified by the machine were not sent by the review, and I assume that from the review only authoritative sources would have been authorized for upload. But I would like also to stress one other point, which is the collaboration between our companies, which is something new, which is something positive that was not there in the past. During the day, we were able to share thousands of pieces of videos, and that's across the different platforms, and that really helped us to really catch up with the huge amount of uploads. The second is the collaboration with law enforcement. Of course, I mentioned the collaboration with the New Zealand one, but when these things happen, our team, I did in the past, get in touch directly with the law enforcement at European level, at APAC level, in all the different regions, to try to understand better where we need to focus our efforts, where we can work together in order to make sure that we are up to the threat. So I would say that this was absolutely horrific. When we woke up in the morning, we took over from our colleagues in APAC. We were absolutely shocked by everything was happening, but we did everything was possible, and I think in the areas that you identified, in particular the fact that our machine were not in the aftermath of the event, incapable to distinguish, for example, when something was clarification or when something was authoritative source, we have now made an improvement which is blocking all the different pieces of content from going online. So hopefully, as we've seen actually this week in Sri Lanka, issues like that will not happen again.
Okay, but again, it was specifically YouTube that raised this, that responded and talked to us about this in previous evidence sessions. So William McCants told us 12 months ago, sometimes where there is a variation, the technology will not automatically take it down, we'll send it for review. We are fine-tuning our technology so we spot even smaller clips. But 12 months on, you're still not able to do that.
So actually, and that's the improvement that we made unlikely because of this horrific event, the rule that William described to you, so that the match is identified, there is a doubt, it's not the same video, then it goes for review. In the future, in case of horrific events like Christchurch, the content is not going up online and then is reviewed. Is blocked, is reviewed, and only after approved can go online.
So, up until now, although it gets sent to review, it's basically still been allowed on YouTube.
To put in the right context, when we're saying that it's sent for review, we need to consider that for this kind of violation, for example, 90% of the content that is sent for review and then is taken down, so for terrorist propaganda or this kind of violation of our policies, the content is taken down with less than 10 views. So the machine already today, in the context that was described by William, are working, are allowing us to take down a lot of content in a very fast way. What we are changing, because of the unprecedented, for the specific threat that facts like Christchurch represent, is even in this case not let the content go up online, send it for review, only when it's approved, then it's going to be available online.
Okay, but the New Zealand media report today has quote from Eric Feinberg of Global Intellectual Property Enforcement Centre, who talks about the YouTube videos that they found sometime after the attack that have now been removed as a result of them reporting it, only as a result of them reporting it, which he says hundreds of thousands of people had access to those videos. The YouTube video we took down had over 720,000 views. Is that correct?
So I'm very sorry, but I'm not aware of this piece of information. I would like, if it's possible, to go back to the team and ask a confirmation, because the rule that we have implemented after Christchurch would not allow pieces of content which are linked to any glorification of this fact to go up online.
Okay, but again, this is something that we have repeatedly raised with you, and for some of this, at the time of the Christchurch attack, it had a content warning up. So you had material, you had bits of these videos that were up within 8 hours with a content warning, so you have enough information to flash it up as a problem, but not to take it down.
Again, if we look at the policies that we have implemented and the algorithm that we have implemented, there are different level of implementation and enforcement of the policies. If it's about the same video is blocked. If it's about pieces of the same video, this is sent for review. In the case of something like Christchurch, we change our policy, so it's not even going up online. It has to be reviewed by a human. In any case, if there is a doubt, it's escalated. So I think in the comprehensive approach that we are taking to this kind of content, there can always be issues like the one that is mentioned there, and I want to look into that and come back to you with more information. But I think we have a robust approach to try to face the threat.
And again, have you identified people who you believe to have been deliberately promoting this in order to deliberately promote terrorist propaganda?
Of course, we have identified, and violation of this kind will lead into blocking the account, taking down the channel. Absolutely. In terms of working with law enforcement, it's a very delicate issue. Why? Because there are two elements to take in consideration. On one side, the need of collaborate together with law enforcement in order to make sure that the evidence from this crime is collected in a way which is in line with the law of the country where the crime is committed. That requires, for example, in most of the cases, for this kind of very dangerous act, to freeze the evidence, wait for a request from the law enforcement to acquire the evidence, and then deliver the evidence in order to make sure that the evidence can be acquired in a form that then can be actually used against the criminals.
So you wait for requests from law enforcement in order to give them information. You don't identify something that is illegal on your platform and report it to the police.
According to the different jurisdictions, we work together with the law enforcement in order to make sure that in the respect of the due process of law, we hand over the information in a way which makes sure that the criminals can be persecuted.
But again, this comes back to the issue raised by Assistant Commissioner Neil Basu,
Sure.
who says that all of your platforms are removing things that are illegal, but you are not reporting it to them. So do you actively report to the police within a jurisdiction if you identify content that is illegal? Not just against your guidelines but not illegal, but material that itself is a crime. Do you report those cases to the police?
We have policies that are in line to the one of our colleagues. But I want
So
to
the answer
stress,
is no.
But I want to stress that it's very, very important to work on these issues, and I did this also in the past when I was working, of course, on issues of less relevant, like, for example, e-commerce, to work together with law enforcement in order to make sure that the evidence is acquired in the right way.
That's fine. That's a fine line. It's
Yes.
very good that you do that. It's very good that
That's-
you want to take the right kind of digital evidence. That's fine. But the issue is whether or not you are letting the law enforcement know about crimes being committed on your platforms. And so it's just a real concern because you are effectively making these crimes possible. You are facilitating these crimes. And I accept that you are doing much more than you were 18 months ago to then respond to them and to take that material down. But you are not actually reporting the crimes that your platforms are making possible. Surely that is a serious problem for people right across the world who want to make sure that crimes are not being committed.
It's a very fair point. I want to stress that we discuss these issues with Europol every week. We have a conference call with the people at the Europol every week. And we came to a place where we decided that the best way is to work together, identify, for example, trends, identify areas where we want to improve, and then find the right process accordingly to the applicable laws to make sure that the evidence are acquired in the proper way.
I've been just concentrating on something which is just a very clear-cut case where it's about terrorist propaganda, where you all accept that it is wrong, that it is illegal and that it should be removed. But it seems to me that time and again you are simply not keeping up with the scale of the problem and the scale of criminal and terrorist activity and doing the things that we all as communities across the world need you to be doing. Do you have a concern that the way that the Sri Lanka government has responded, actually countries and governments are being forced into actually this very strong reaction because they have no confidence in your ability to sort things, even if that might have all kinds of wider repercussions by banning your platforms for a temporary period, even if that causes huge problems for people, but they're being forced to do so because they say they don't have confidence in your abilities. Aren't you concerned that that is going to happen more often if you can't get your act together? I don't know who would like to respond.
I would like to first stress that our focus after the horrific events in Sri Lanka was to first and foremost make sure that we applied the procedures that we described before. So we identify the attackers, we work together with law enforcement in making sure that they, if they have a channel, if they have a presence on the platform, this is closed. Identify make sure that when people is searching for information on what's happening, they find authoritative sources. And also working together with law enforcement again in trying to understand how the facts are developing and who is the group that is actually accused of the facts, and then take action on the channel. This is something that we have done in the last hours. So that was our focus. On the decision of the government, of course, this is a decision of a government, and we need to respect this. There are voices from civil society, voices from journalist organizations that are raising concern on the fact that this is also impairing the possibility to actually communicate and understand better what's happening there. So, but this is a different issue. I think our focus at the moment was not to answer to the decision of the government from Sri Lanka, was to make sure that we have our house in order.
I think my question is whether you think you have any responsibility to make sure that countries don't end up in that situation and needing to react in that way, or deciding that they want to react in that kind of way, because they can have confidence in your platforms to be able to act in the way that they need you to.
I'll go. Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the question, and as my colleague here said, that the ethnic violence, the targeting of someone at worship is one of the most despicable acts, and again, our hearts go out to those that were impacted by the bombings on Easter. I believe we do have a responsibility under our policies to enforce our community standards to ensure that that type of hate, that type of terrorism, that type of violence is not on our platform, and we do that swiftly. In the immediate aftermath of this attack, we designated the event, designated the individuals as terrorists, and we were removing that content, sharing much of it with our colleagues here. And for certain other, I will say, where we have seen other types of ethnic violence or terrorism, we have invested significantly, as we have in Sri Lanka, with the 30,000 people that now work on safety and security. We have dedicated teams that focus on these markets, that we have language experts, subject matter experts on the challenges they face, and we really want to work with partners on the ground so we better understand it. I do, as my colleague said, communication after any type of this event is important. I think it's a way for families, loved ones to connect, and so we really do feel that it is better to have an open internet, because that is how people are able to know if someone is safe. In fact, on Facebook, we have a system called Safety Check after any, whether it's a natural disaster, unfortunately an event like this. And many people use Safety Check after the events in Sri Lanka. Obviously, they can't do that now after the blockage of the internet. We would rather see that to be open, but we share many of the same concerns as the Sri Lankan government. Their constituents, their citizens are our community, and we have the same goals of wanting to keep them safe. And we respect their way of going about that. We think that it would be better for it to be open, for our open communication, but I do understand.
Stephen Doughty.
So my problem is I don't think you're even getting some of the basics right in terms of the material that's used to radicalise those who carry out such horrific attacks in the first place. And when all three of your companies appeared before this committee some time ago, you all admitted that you were not proactively searching for other organisations, so far right, extreme right wing, Northern Irish terrorist organisations and others. It was basically in the middle that the entire focus had been on Islamist organisations, and that you weren't routinely searching for prescribed or other problematic organisations. And I've raised some very, very specific concerns about far right content, particularly relating to an organisation called Radio Aryan and another organisation called System Resistance Network. Now, Twitter, you said a moment ago, we all need to get better at identifying content beyond videos and everything else, and you've got a URL database. So why did you have for so long an account on your site actually called @RadioAryan that was providing links to the most disgusting anti-Semitic, Islamophobic, homophobic, racist, far-right content? Why did you allow that account to exist?
Thank you. First, if I could just outline our rules in this space, because I think that would be helpful for the committee.
Well, no. I'd like to know why that account was allowed to exist, and then why it was subsequently taken down only after a media report involving myself and others.
So at the beginning of your question, you asked about proactive searching, and we said last week it was unacceptable that we were solely relying on user reports to find and identify violations of our rules. Now, 38% of the enforcement action we take on abuse is identified through our own internal.
Okay, so that's very interesting. But why was that account at a very basic level? An account. We're not talking about even a link. We're talking about the account is called @RadioAryan on Twitter. Why was that allowed to be up on your site for so long?
I'm not familiar with the details of that specific account.
Even though that was reported to you by myself.
I'm not familiar with that.
Okay, so you also have accounts, I looked last night, even though you've now removed the main account, you've got other accounts linking to that content. You've got other accounts linking to the Daily Stormer, which is a well-known US neo-Nazi site, which includes a link to an article I found in 3 Minutes last night, which says that the New Zealand killer bears no responsibility and it was a legitimate revenge attack. Why are there links to those very well known? I'm not talking about deeply hidden organisations or links. Why are there links to organisations like that in full public view on your platform? I'm
aware of high-profile accounts and individuals on the platform, and when those accounts are reported to us. We take it very seriously and we review those.
Well, you didn't, because it took weeks for you to remove Radio Aryan when I reported it to you.
We've now designated almost 100 white supremacist, nationalist or separatist groups to date.
But apparently not. But apparently not the Daily Stormer, which is one of the most well-known neo-Nazi websites in the US.
We have a number of ongoing assessments as we do day in, day out. What I would say is that one of the challenges we have is that, that they often say about the police, you can't arrest your way out of the problem. For us, we have no interest in having violent extremist groups on our platform, but we can't ban our way out of this problem.
No, but that's just words, because this is the basics. We're not talking about deep hidden content here. We are talking about the basics of very, very well known, publicly reported and identified organisations that are of concern to law enforcement organisations across the world, and a range of NGO Hope Not Hate, other organisations that have identified these, let alone this committee, members of this committee raising them, and you're still providing links to the most basic of these organisations.
I mean, for us, the priority is going to be using technology to identify accounts that break our rules. Safety is our top priority as a company, and we will continue to invest in tools that help us surface those accounts for review.
So will you be ensuring that Radio Aryan, System Resistance Network, the Daily Stormer, and other organisations like that are not available as links on your platform and are put into those URL databases and other automatic systems you have?
As I said, I'm not familiar with the details of those accounts, but if we identify a breach, we will take action.
Okay, well, I mean, it's simply not good enough. I mean, these have been reported to on multiple occasions. Facebook, I similarly raised concerns with your own team directly about links to such organisations. Took you weeks again to remove links to Radio Aryan from Facebook after I had to get to the state of raising it directly with your staff here in the UK. Can you explain then why you've still got links to the Daily Stormer, Systems Resistance Network, and the link to some of these other sites, including Gab? I found a particular link last night that linked to a page that said, if Muslims are the bullets, the system is the gun in the hand of the Jew. Can you explain to me why Facebook is routinely allowing links to organisations, again, very well known, we're not talking about deeply hidden organisations here, that anyone can find within minutes on your platform?
Thank you, Mr. Dowdy. I want to be clear, and thank you for raising Radio Aryan. I think we were able to actually designate them as a hate organization and remove them from our platform within 1 week of you raising it to us, which is very fast. We have a very deliberate process, but thanks to your efforts there, we were able to do that. That's not to say that someone could share information about Radio Aryan on our platform that we would not find immediately. Once we're made aware of that, we would remove it. There is no room for praise, support, or representation of that organization or any of these hate organizations.
So why have you still got links this morning to Systems Resistance Network and the Daily Stormer?
I believe I know for a fact that Daily Stormer, we have what we call Black Hold, or shared to our URL database, that network. I'm not exactly sure what you have on your.
I've got multiple links here, Mr. Potts. Let me just. I mean, you claim that these things are being looked at, and yet you can just find them. I mean, I can find page after page after page here, linking to their articles, showing their things, talking about. I mean, I won't use the terms, but utterly offensive terms relating to Jews, Muslims, black people. All there in full view on Facebook here this morning. So clearly, your systems aren't working.
To be clear, we have 2.7 billion users on our platform that share billions of pieces of content every day, and we have millions of reports against that content. Some of that is proactive, some of that is based off user-generated. We do an extremely good job of finding this information and removing it when it violates our terms. But that's not to say that anything is perfect.
I know, but these are direct links to the Daily Stormer website. Okay, so that's a very easy thing to search for. And we're not talking about a video that's been altered or music added. We're talking about the most basic thing, which is a link to a well-known neo-Nazi website, and it's all over your platform. Why is that not being found?
Mr. Dowdy, I'm happy to follow up with you after. I would need to see the actual link to make sure that it is one that we have identified and put into our URL base. It is the case that we put the top.
It's the link to its own website. It's the link to the actual website. I mean, it's there for everyone to see. It's the most basic thing.
I understand your concerns. I'm happy to take that feedback. I want to make sure that we are removing that. So if I can follow up with you after that.
So you will remove links to the Daily Stormer?
Absolutely.
Absolutely, and System Resistance Network?
Absolutely. They're both banned.
And you will proactively search for the range of neo-Nazi and far-right organisations that have been identified by groups such as Hope Not Hate?
We have long held that white supremacist organizations, far-right organizations let me rephrase this. Our policies around terrorism and hate are ideological and apathetic. We do not care whether you claim to be a far left or a far right group. If you have a deep link to violence, a deep link to hate, we remove you. We designate you.
Well, you clearly don't, Mr. Potts. And can I turn to YouTube? Similarly, have you got content linking to Radio Aryan on your site?
As far as I know, no. We don't have.
As far as you know, no. Okay. Well, last night I found a link to one of their full radio broadcasts again within a moment, which I'm sorry to use the words, talks about going after niggers and faggots. Okay. Full broadcast there from an individual providing multiple links to neo-Nazi organisations. I found another set of videos, music again, white supremacist and neo-Nazi organisations. I found people providing links to Britain First, which, as you will be well aware, is an organisation which I believe has been banned from some of the other platforms. I found huge amounts of videos from far-right and Islamist organisations talking about going after gays, homosexuality and the campaign for immorality, advocating stoning, all sorts of different things. I mean, it's just a cesspit. Why are those links on your site?
Let me take a step back and put the things in a perspective. In looking at content when it's uploaded on the platform, we take in consideration two pillars. One is the law, the second is our policies. For what concerns our policies don't allow any kind of these abuses. So I really need to look into this content that you are reporting to me.
There's loads of it. There's loads of it. I mean, again, we're not talking about, deeply hidden content here. We are talking stuff in full public view. We're talking about basic links. I mean, link after link after link to neo-Nazi and far-right extremist organisations, all in the comment pages, people commenting on it afterwards. And not only that, but actual links to full audio recordings of neo-Nazi broadcasts advocating violence against Muslims, Jews, gays, the state, the violent overthrow of the state. I mean, how is that content getting through if you've got these policies in place?
I work for years with NGOs from all over Europe on this kind of issues. In the context of the European Code of Conduct Against Hate Speech, we are working together with NGOs from 26 countries, now 27, and it absolutely is an important issue. We are focusing in that by improving, of course, the enforcement of our policies, working with experts and NGOs. Just to give you a number, in the last 2 years, thanks to the work that we have done with these NGOs in the context of the Code of Conduct, we were able to pass from a takedown rate for the referrals that we are receiving on these kind of issues across all Europe from 40% to 80%. So the situation is improving, but still, I fully understand that there are areas like the one that you are highlighting where we need to look into that.
I'm sorry. But why is it that every single time all three of your companies appear before this committee, members of this committee, including myself, the chair, and others, are able to find content within minutes? We're not talking about weeks of research or looking for complicated hidden stuff on the dark web or stuff that's been altered. We're able to find stuff within minutes or seconds. I mean, I was able to find the attack video in Christchurch within seconds on various of your platforms. I mean, this stuff. Your systems are simply not working, and quite frankly, it's a cesspit, and it feels like your companies really don't give a damn. You give a lot of words, you give a lot of rhetoric, you don't actually take action. You don't even know that this content is on there. You're fearing for us this morning, and you haven't even looked up the organisations that we've raised. It's all on there.
We need also to remember that there are 2 billion of users that come every month on our platform to find content, to learn something, to share something. Of course, this is absolutely a horrific issue, and we need to do a better job in trying to understand, and we are doing actually a better job in trying to understand how to stay up to the threat. For example, something that I would like to mention, since the last hearing, we introduced a team that is called the Intel Desk that is dedicated to make sure that we better understand the trends of violation of our policies of far-right organization, of extremists.
That's all wonderful, but they're clearly not doing a very good job, because quite frankly as well, I find it extraordinary that I can find all this hate content directed at the LGBT community on YouTube, and yet I know for a fact that you block and restrict positive LGBT content by your own YouTube creators and block it so it's unrestricted. And yet last night I could find videos advocating, you know, violence and hatred towards the LGBT community. So quite frankly, your policies mean nothing because you're not following them through.
I've
had enough of listening to this.
I would like to look into this content and come back to you in any case if possible.
I mean, you're all three of you not doing your jobs.
John Woodcock.
Thank you, Chair. Could I take you briefly back to the issue of what you share and the requirements on you to share with law enforcement agencies? If the UK government put a requirement on all of you as companies to share the identifying IP address data with every for every account which breaches your policies, what would be your response to that?
I can tell that for my personal experience, we are also discussing these issues in the context of with the European institutions, in the context of the EU evidence evidence initiatives, very similar to some of the ideas that, by the way, are also in the online arms white paper. And of course, the focus on trying to find ways to make sure that the e-evidence are preserved and there is a right level of collaboration with the law enforcement is something that we are very open to discuss.
And you all talk about active collaboration, and I'm sure that is the case in specific instances. But what would be the bar, or what would be your objection? Would you have no objection to simply routinely sharing that identifying data with the appropriate law enforcement agencies? Ms. Minshaw, you made the case of needles and haystacks, and we can take that as read. But if a government says, actually, we want all of that data available as you either ban the user or restrict a particular piece of content, what would Twitter's response be?
My understanding is that this is exactly the issue that the Cloud Act is intended to address.
But it doesn't go as far as that at the moment. No one is suggesting that. So are you being unspecific because you're not sure, or which is? So
as it stands, if there is a threat to life or serious harm, we can proactively reach out to law enforcement where we have relationships. US law would prevent us going beyond that, and for some time I think all of us have raised this as an issue, and the Cloud Act is intended to address that exact gap.
But if UK law, if the UK changed its law to require everything available to be routinely shared, yes, there is a different path which is going down, but it doesn't go as far as doing that. Could you do it? Would you object to doing it?
I think this is something I'd have to look at in terms of the implementation of the Cloud Act, the details of which I'm not sure. But I think it's also a question for the white paper that on online harms, in that there is a very thoughtful section on illegal content, and I think more detail on where the regulator ends and law enforcement begins would be very welcome.
No, indeed, but I mean, this is clearly a live issue, and there is an active debate about the level of responsibility being taken by your platforms, as we've seen today, as we've seen with every terrorist atrocity. So it's clearly a question being posed and mechanisms in place. So I'm surprised that you can't give me an answer. If it's a bad idea, you need to tell us why it's a bad idea, because these are the directions we're going to go down. Mr. Potts, do you have a view on this?
Thank you, Mr. Wilcock. I would say that we want to comply with law where we can. Sure. When there are different regulatory frameworks in different areas, where, as Ms. Minshaw mentioned, where they conflict, we have to essentially deconflict those, make sure that we solve for those issues. We are a U.S.-based company. We operate internationally. We're a U.S.-based company, and we must adhere to the U.S.-based laws as well. We do respond to legal requests from government for that information. So if you request information about any of our users, data, location, we will comply with that if the request is legal, just.
So if the UK government makes a standing request that everything which every user who creates content which you then ban is therefore routinely shared with UK law enforcement agencies, that's fine.
I want to be clear that I fully understand your question. Are you saying that every piece of content that we would remove under our standards, but not necessarily illegal? I would, if we have a specific proposal, I'm happy to take that back to the team because I want to make sure that I fully understand. It seems like a very grand.
Well, okay,
let's
restrict this. Not necessarily offensive, but let's restrict this to terrorist-related activity. When there is clearly, all of you have platforms. All platforms. For all platforms, there is a very large volume of cases where you take down material but do not routinely or not required to share it with UK law enforcement agencies. If the UK passes a law to say you must automatically share that the IP data related to those accounts, which clearly you have, would you have an issue with doing that?
I'm happy to take that back to the team to get you a direct answer. I would want to just point out that to make sure that I'm being clear here, that I try to fully process your question. Even within the space of terrorism violating content, there are different levels. We spoke earlier about deliberate actors. Those are people that we want to ensure that they meet the correct due process. There are also other people that may be sharing for awareness, but not sharing in a way that sharing in a way that actually violates our community's policies. And if doing that, that would seem to be a bit overbroad. So, for example, if I want to share awareness of the attack in Sri Lanka, but I do it in a way that violates our policies, where it's not clear that you're condemning, you just kind of share something without a caption. So that puts us in a very difficult position to assess what someone's intent was behind the sharing, and so I would have some caution about that.
I understand that, and that's and that is of course a valid point. But you said at various points you've said that you want government's help with this. Now, if the government says if governments say we are taking control of terrorist policy, of overall terrorist policy, and we are instructing you to share that, and we will make the assessment as to what has been shared in a non-criminal way or what might have been below the criminal bar but nevertheless may want to flag up activity where a UK programme like Prevent may want to take into account. What I'm trying to get at is whether you think there are legal bars to applying that, whether you would have objections as a company. If you don't have the answer now, I would appreciate from the three of you a corporate response on this, unless any of you have anything to add just now.
I'm happy to take that back to our teams and review and follow up with your office.
Okay, thank you.
Chris Green.
Thank you. Ms Minshall, who's responsible for the content on Twitter?
There are many different teams who have a role in content on Twitter, from our engineers to our safety team.
So it's Twitter as a whole?
Yeah.
So Twitter's responsible for its content. So obviously individuals tweeting whatever they tweet and whatever they share, obviously it's a personal responsibility, but ultimately you're responsible for it. Does the content on Twitter reflect the moral character that you're broadcasting? Does it reflect your moral character as a company, as an organisation, for the stuff you're allowing to be broadcast?
Let me be very clear. Some of the examples that have been raised today and in this committee previously do not meet my personal moral threshold and are abhorrent, and our role is to identify that content as quickly as possible and remove it from the platform. And
within Twitter, within social media more broadly, there are teams of moderators looking at content and stopping it being broadcast or rebroadcast. How many people do that for Twitter?
If I could just give an overview of our strategy more broadly than just focusing specifically on the number of people we employ operationally. As I've said earlier, technology is critical for us as a company. Algorithms don't need weekends, they don't need to sleep. Not only does technology help us find content that breaks our rules, but it also helps us prioritise reports. It helps us block spam accounts without a human intervention. We suspended, or we saw about 230 million attempts in the first half of last year to come onto Twitter that violated our policies on spam.
So are these non-human interventions, are they fast enough? Are they good enough yet?
We've seen success in a number of areas. I think on the spam side...
Clearly there's a distinction between, the impression I got, between Facebook and Twitter. Clearly, in the response to Mr. Doughty's points, the answers were far faster or a far better response from Mr. Potts' organisations compared to yours. So why is that? Why aren't you keeping up?
Sorry, can you clarify the question?
In terms of some of the organisations that could, perhaps should be prescribed, that shouldn't be shared on Twitter, I think we heard the evidence that there was a difference in the response in terms of shutting down this content.
On prescribed organisations, there are a number of groups that we prescribed several years ago with different platforms. And
well, not just prescribed, but other organisations which clearly don't share the values that Twitter would want to broadcast.
So what could you clarify the question there?
Sorry, there is significant, quite repugnant content on Twitter at the moment that has more effectively, it seems, been shut down on Facebook and other platforms than it has been on Twitter. Isn't Twitter keeping pace?
I'm not sure that that's a characteristic or a standard I would recognise.
Would you say you're keeping pace with other organisations?
Yes, I would say that we are in a very different place than we were 2 years ago, and regular Twitter users will have seen a step change. Mm-hmm. And we have indications that our automated systems are having an effect. On something like malicious automation, we're seeing the number of human reports go down because our tools are catching those attempts before humans see them.
Why are you unwilling to give a figure for the number of people involved in moderation?
I will share the figure. I just wanted to give that context. We have 1,500 people working on policy enforcement and content moderation.
And what jurisdiction do these people reside? Are many of them in the UK? Is it the US? Where are they?
We're a global company and they're based all over the world.
So a fair distribution around the globe. Over time, there's increasing pressure from society, from politics for more and more censorship, essentially, more and more control. So at the moment, it doesn't seem as though what society would expect, but certainly what politicians would hope for, that you're actually meeting the mark. At what point do you think we would actually have the confidence that some of these extremist organisations would be excluded, or kind of would we expect it to be within a day?
On scale, we see 500 million tweets
Yeah.
a day. 1 in a million happens 500 times, and we're never going to get to a 100% success rate in the near term on any of these issues.
Yep.
But we look at our metrics compared to the same time last year. We're now removing 3 times the number of abusive accounts within 24 hours compared to the same time last year. And that uptick in speed has been independently validated by the EU Code of Conduct.
Would it, taking a slightly different approach, social media is used by all sorts of different people. We know in society more broadly, we know who not to talk to, who to avoid. We know what, in terms of newspapers and things, we know what we don't want to see. Do we ultimately have to take the same approach with social media, in that we know there's going to be unpleasant, repugnant stuff on there, and we have to take a similar kind of approach that we would more broadly? And that's just something we have to accept. Is that what you would say?
That is a decision for lawmakers, and the government have put forward a proposal. I think from our perspective, there's plenty of really positive aspects to the white paper, not least the creation of a new regulator could be a big step forward. But to come back to you on some of the challenges, the crux of any tech regulation is international enforcement. There's over 2 million apps on the Android App Store. The overwhelming majority of those are not based in the UK and don't have people in the UK. So how you enforce a standard of behaviour across the internet that has the capacity to involve those organisations as well is the key question.
Yeah, so I don't think this tweet would get over the line in terms of being banned, but I think you'd appreciate whether it's the hard right, whether it's on the left of our politics, there's a lot of kind of repugnant stuff out there. And the actual substance, so I'll just read you this tweet. It's of a video of actual Guatemalan soldiers beating young people. And it was put out by someone, I think, on the left of politics, who said, why does this secretly recorded video appear on your cowardly, show your cowardly soldiers brutally beating up Palestinian children again? And that was directed to @Israeli PM. And the suggestion was that was the Israeli Defence Force. So that was a tweet that was widely seen on Twitter. So do you think at some point, and we know the context in the UK of anti-Semitism and the targeting of the Jewish community and the fears, the genuine fears and legitimate fears that the Jewish community have in the UK. This tweet wasn't taken down by Twitter. I think it was deleted by the person who put it up. Do you think this goes against your rules and it should have been taken down by Twitter? Is that the case now, or do you think perhaps in the future it would, as the rules are developed, it would transgress those rules?
On that tweet specifically, I will take it away because I'm not familiar with whether it would or would not break our rules, and I will come back to you. But on your broader question about content that doesn't break our rules, can we do anything? And I think the answer is yes, absolutely. There's a couple of things I'd point out. The first is we now take into account a number of signals in how we organise content in communal areas, like in search and in conversation. So if you're a Twitter user, you'll see this kind of view more replies section. Content goes through a machine learning model to try and understand the level of toxicity, whether or not it violates our rules.
Yep.
And we found that approach somewhat successful. It's decreased abuse reports by 4% and 8% respectively. I think the other thing to point out as well is in a couple of months we're going to begin trialling in one of the countries in which we operate author-moderated replies, and that will give users the ability to hide replies they get to tweets. So I think there is plenty we can do beyond our rules to support people in the content they wish to see.
Thank you. Mr. Potts, for your organisation, in terms of moderation, in terms of the number of moderators, how many do you have at the moment?
Thank you, Mr. Green. We have over 30,000 people working in safety and security. 15,000 of those are content moderators.
15,000. So I understand that the committee was informed in December 2017 that the figure would be, by the end of 2018, it would be 20,000. Why aren't you reaching that target in terms of number of moderators?
I think we're still growing, and I think we will continue to be on track with growth in our content moderators. One of the big places of investment as well has been in our engineers and our artificial intelligence, which also does the job of what moderators do. We're able to surface much more content that way, proactively surface to moderators a better quality of report so that they can then apply our policies. In fact, we're very transparent about that. We have our Community Standards Enforcement Report, and I'm pleased to say that the next edition is coming out in May. And I believe that we are now over half through all of our abuse types surfaced proactively by our automation. So it's not relying on a user report, not relying on a human, but the AI is surfacing it to our reviewers to say, hey, this seems like it's violating, let's review it and let's remove it. And in that case, it's bearing fruit.
So you'd have in terms of artificial intelligence and the advantages that gives, obviously there's going to be some learning process, and over time artificial intelligence will be more and more effective. And that will also reduce that time between someone raising a concern with the police or with you and your assessment of that material and your response therefore to blocking it.
I think that's correct, Mr. Green. I think the way that we think about these issues is really prevalence as a metric, and what we mean by prevalence is, and I think Mr. Pancini mentioned, it's the views that any piece of content receives. So you want to try to limit those views. Now, if there's a piece of content that is on the platform for 1 minute, 1 hour, 1 day, and it never receives any views, that's probably less impactful than something that's getting hundreds or thousands of views. So by using artificial intelligence and automated technologies, when we are able to identify what is going more viral or what is receiving that engagement, it allows us to surface it and review it sooner.
Thank you. And with YouTube, there is a concern more broadly, like if you can respond to, in terms of the moderators, they're not necessarily employees of the company. So in terms of the moderators themselves, if they aren't employees of the company, how effectively can we hold you to account for the quality of their moderation?
So absolutely. Let me make a step back and give you an overview on the approach that we're having, and then I will answer to your very good question, Mr. Green. So in the last 2 years, we made progress in this specific space. We are now able, thanks to the technology that we have deployed, to for the 8.7 million of pieces of content that we removed in the last quarter of last year, the 71% of them were flagged by machine. Mm-hmm. And of this 71%, 73% were taken down with no views. And that's exactly the point that Neil was making. For us, the goal is really to reduce the number of views that violative content get on the platform. Because of course, the challenge will always be to make sure that we have less and less violative content. But this is, in a certain sense, out of the control of Open Platform. Mm-hmm. That's something that is also acknowledged in the Online Arms white paper. So reducing the number of views and working together, and that's the second point, people and machine working together in doing this job, that's, in a certain sense, is the key element. The third point is continuously update our policies, and we made 30 changes in the last month, so it's basically since the last hearing. It's also a way to keep up with this development, and the point that was made before about in the previous hearing as well, about the need to be proactive. I think this is something that we as an industry, we are now doing. And this Intel desk that we have at YouTube, our chief of the Intel desk is a former intelligence deputy of FBI, and is reporting directly to our CEO, and they discuss these issues. It's a way to, region per region, market per market, understand where the threats is moving and is evolving. And that's on your point about moderators. On your question about moderators, first there is a mix of YouTube employees and external vendors helping us in doing this job in a scalable way. All of them have the same level of trainings and the same kind of trainings done by YouTube people. We created these trainings which last something between 3 and 6 weeks together with the external expert. So the moderators go through the same level of training, and they also go through the same level of development. So, of course, tenure, expertise, and understanding of the issue is something very important for moderators then to become more and more expert, and then to be dedicated to the more delicate issues, like, for example, reviewing proscribed groups or reviewing terrorist organization, where you need to understand the context, where you need to know the logo, you need to know the language, and then be effective. So all this aside, the element of making sure that there is a high standard that is across all the different reviewers is present, but it's very important to stress that the progress that we made were thanks to a comprehensive approach, which is including technology, people, and policies.
And in terms of the moderators, whether they work directly for you or not, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, whoever is held equally to account, whether it's your employees or whether it's a contractor.
Of course.
Yeah. Thank you.
Just to quickly clarify on that, on the figures. Is it right, YouTube, that less than 1% of the videos that are flagged to you by users for hateful, abusive content, for promotion of violence and extremism, or for harassment and bullying. Less than 1% of them are actually removed.
Actually, I'm not aware of this metric.
Okay, isn't that the kind of figure that actually, or at least the sense of proportion that you ought to have? I mean, just this is my understanding from your YouTube reports that users flagged in the last quarter that you've got records for, so until December, there were around 12 million videos flagged by users for hateful or abusive content, violent, repulsive content, or promoting terrorism. And it looks as though in the same quarter you've got around 110,000 videos were removed. Now, it's not clear whether those ones that were removed also includes the ones that you've identified automatically, or whether that's just the ones that were flagged. So it might be a much smaller proportion of the ones that have been flagged to you.
So, just to summarize, and I hope I understood correctly your question. I think that in terms of efficiency, as I mentioned before, in the last quarter of 2018, what we've seen is that the 71% of the flags that led to removal were coming from machine. So, of course, machine, because they're working, thanks to algorithm, artificial intelligence, are very precise. Then we have another source of flags that are coming from our expert, the trusted flaggers. We work with in different countries. We have 6 organizations here in the UK that are doing an incredible job. And also, for example, the police is part of these trusted flaggers. The efficiency in terms of the number of flags, of course, are much less than the one that's generated by machine, but the efficiency and the precision of these trusted flaggers is very high, is high 80%. Then we have a normal user, and indeed, in the number of in relation to the number of flags that we are receiving from users, for everyday users, the quality of the flags is less than the trusted flagger, is less than machine. So these are the numbers. I can come back to you with a more specific breakdown.
Okay. So that suggests, what you just said suggests that actually it's worse than just 1%. That suggests that it's less than 0.5% of the content that is being actively flagged by users as violating those standards is actually being removed. I mean, that is tiny. I mean, even Twitter is talking about taking down or taking action on somewhere between 3% and 10%, depending on the category.
So we review every flag that we are receiving. In terms of the efficiency, I need to look into the data, but I think we are.
I'm surprised that this isn't the kind of thing that even if you didn't have the precise figure in your head, you had a rough sense of the ballpark.
40%.
Maybe it's 10%, maybe it's
40%.
5%, maybe it's 2%.
40%.
40%
yes.
of the.
I need to check, but
okay, that would be really helpful because I accept I may be misreading the data. It would actually be very helpful to have the same precise data from all of the social media platforms. I think Twitter, seemed to provide it in some form. Facebook, as far as I can see, we have information on the amount that you have taken down, but not what it is as a proportion of the cases flagged. So that would be very helpful to have as well. Stuart MacDonald.
Thank you very much, Chair. In a moment, I'll ask some specific questions about use of algorithms. But before I do, a more general question, first of all. To what extent would each of you accept that the growth or the success, the recent success of far-right and other extreme ideologies is down to how they are able to use your platforms? Who would like to go first?
I think that the far-right's use of digital tools is well documented. What I think is particularly striking, and this is something previous witnesses to this committee have raised, is the sheer variety of platforms that are being used. We see people leaving Twitter all the time saying, follow me on X, add me on Y platform. And there is a likely risk over the next few years that the better our tools get, the more and more users we remove from our platform, the more they will migrate to other parts of the internet where nobody is looking, or indeed maybe nobody can look because they're private encrypted communications.
Now that may be true, but isn't the problem that first of all it is on the mainstream platforms like Facebook and Twitter and YouTube that they are sort of brought into the fold, and then sure later on in the journey they are pushed into places where even more extreme material can be found, but as a starting point it's their use of these 3 platforms and 1 or 2 others that is also incredibly significant. Would you accept that?
Again, I would go back to the words of Neil Basu that this is an issue across the entire media ecosystem.
Okay. Mr. Potts?
First, I want to say that violence, and whether they're far right or other groups that espouse hate, espouse terrorism, aren't allowed on our platform. We want to make it a hostile environment, as hostile as possible. I think if the question is about radicalization, I think it's a very complex issue. I believe studies show that radicalization happens in many forms. It can happen at the local pub. It can happen within the family, within the church. It can happen online as well. I think that any solution that we focus on needs to really be comprehensive and attack all of those areas, get to the root of what hate is and why that ideology exists. So I want to be sure that when we think about these things, we think of them in those comprehensive terms. I still think there's a lot of study to be done, but I do think that throughout all of those areas that radicalization can prosper.
But things like racist political ideologies, not even going as far as radicalising anyone to an act of terrorism. I mean, that sort of movement has had considerable success by use of your platform. Should you accept that?
I think any type of movement can have success both on social media, online. I think it has success offline. These platforms largely, or these ideologies largely start offline. I think that is accurate to say as well. They may be able to spread online and reach other individuals. We take it serious to invest in our ways of stopping that hate on our platform. But I do appreciate your point that it can happen in many forms.
Mr. Pancini?
Indeed, there are at least 2 areas I would like to add to what was said by my colleagues where we need to work together. One is to make sure that the technology or the solution that we are implementing as big companies can also be shared with the smaller platform, because the risk of a spillover effect that we've seen already in, for example, in the context of Daesh, could also happen for far-right groups, and that's something that we can fight together through the activity that, for example, we're doing with the GIFCT of training small platforms on how to use our database of ashes, or how to better be prepared for the new threats that radicalization for this group, for example, far-right groups represent. Second point is the work that we have done, and we can do all together in terms of creating anti-radicalization programs in schools. We just in 2018 had a program that outreached something like 2 million of students here in UK.
But just to go back to the basic question, do you accept, though, that extreme right-wing and other sort of hateful ideologies are having success, and a large part of that success is down to how they exploit or are facilitated on platforms such as your own? I mean, we're all here trying to work out a solution to something. I just want to be absolutely clear that we all agree that there's a problem here.
We are aware of the problem. Of course, these are abuse of our policies that we don't accept. We are studying this phenomenon. What I was trying to stress is that we are seeing that as much as we are making progress on extremism online, the risk of the spillover effect is something that we need to take in consideration.
And there was also mention there of the spillover from offline to online. Can I just check, when your platforms are taking action either in relation to a specific post or piece of material, or to ban a channel or a particular account or user, to what extent are those decisions based entirely on what has gone on in your own platforms, or what has gone on in other platforms, or indeed what has gone on offline altogether?
Maybe I will start. As you know, or as you may know, we recently banned a number of groups and organizations within the UK, including Britain First, including the English Defence League and others. And we look at a series of signals, both on our platform, on other platforms, but also offline. For example, if we know that an organization is engaged in violence offline, that they have, whether they are hosting events that espouse violence, whether they're actually carrying out violence, we take those signals in as well. We obviously work with our partners, civil society, academics, to understand this better. We take input from government and law enforcement as well as organizations to be better able to understand those trends.
Similar with Twitter?
Similar. We have criteria by which we designate violent extremist groups. Partly that's informed by national and international lists. Otherwise, it's pretty much three things. First, does the group identify, either through its stated purpose or its actions, as an extremist group? Do they use violence to further their cause? And do they target civilians, all of which considers offline context?
It's absolutely important to work together with the expert. That's, for example, the reason why we are giving £1 million fund to the UK-based Institute for Strategic Dialogue to better understand the development of this phenomenon, because we need to do a work in better understanding the behavior of this organization on our platform, but also put this in the broader context of the issue at large in our society, and that's what is really can help us to make progress in better addressing the problem.
Okay. I'm going to turn now to the question of algorithms. Most of my questions will be directed at YouTube, Mr. Pancini. Several users have reported being directed to offensive content, a lot of it promoting extreme sort of right-wing ideologies. So videos have been recommended to them, even though they have not been engaging in anything remotely similar. Why do your algorithms promote that sort of far-right content to people who aren't even showing any signs of being interested in it?
Products like Up Next or recommended videos are very useful if you are, for example, going on the platform on YouTube and you search for music, and if you want to have like a suggestion of other kind of music that you may like, or other users that look, for example, at this specific video liked, then Up Next is a great tool to discover.
Absolutely.
The challenge for speech is indeed that it's a different dynamics. Speech is very different than cooking suggestion of musical preference, which are, by the way, the vast majority of the reason why people is coming on the platform. But still, this is a very important challenge. So we are looking into that. There are different measures that we are implementing. I would like to mention at least two. One is to make sure that authoritative content is coming up, is having more visibility. That's a way for us to address specific issues and speech-related issues. Second is to make sure that controversial content, that content that can be offensive, is having less visibility. That are the two areas where we are investing. All of this in the context of...
But it doesn't seem to be working at all well. I mean, one of the members of the committee staff here did an experiment in preparation for this hearing, and they opened up a new YouTube account, and all they searched for were terms such as British news, British politics, football, music, TV and games. And then suddenly, through just searching perfectly innocent terms, they were being recommended towards sort of right-wing commentator, then a very controversial psychologist who essentially what I regard as racist views, and then a far-right political figure in the United Kingdom. Again, I haven't really getting any idea from you about how this is happening. Why is that happening?
It's in our business interest to get this right. I want to make it very clear, because this kind of content does not drive any engagement, and actually advertisers are not interested in supporting this content. Now, the problem is that in looking at political speech or speech more in general, the suggestion that user may have are suggestions that can go across the different, across all the spectrum, from slightly more extremist, mainstream, absolutely no related or not extremist related. Now, indeed, there is also the possibility that there is a trajectory towards content that is more extremist, but this is not in our intention. This is not why we designed this algorithm. This is why we need to find, so we want to find solution to make sure that this is not happening.
Surely you should have a much more sort of precautionary way of approaching. Fine, music side of things seems to work absolutely well, but if you're directing sort of perfectly innocent users towards extremist, hateful content, then surely the better thing to do would be, rather than just carry on regardless and we'll see if we can fix it in the future, stop these algorithms applying to certain types of content or directing people to certain types of content. I can't really see an excuse for why these algorithms are staying in place.
It's a very good question, Mr. MacDonald. Just to give you a number to show you how the situation is not so black and white. 80% of the views that the BBC gets are coming from Up Next, which means that there is this challenge, is complex. We need to find ways to improve the quality of the result of the algorithm. It's in our interest, and we are working on that.
But in terms of what actually the algorithms tend to recommend, there's, as you'll be aware, the Algo Transparency website, which collects information about the most recommended videos on YouTube each and every day. So again, the committee staff did an analysis of the most recommended videos for the first couple of weeks in April. And in terms of news sites, for example, 39 of the 44 political videos that were being recommended were overtly partisan to the American right, and controversial right-wing figures being promoted pretty intensely. Again, I mean, can you explain why that is happening, and how can you defend what is basically just political bias?
There is no political bias. Is not in our business interest actually to do this.
It may not be direct bias,
but there is a challenge. There is a challenge. We are developing products that are going in the direction to make sure that when it's about speech, when it's about breaking news, when it's about political speech, authoritative content, so content that is labeled as authoritative, should have more visibility. This product will be rolled out in the coming months. I would like to, if possible, to keep you updated on these changes in order to make sure that we are addressing your questions.
Done absolutely urgently, and in fact, if these algorithms aren't right just now, they should just be stopped. They shouldn't be applied to certain types of content. I mean, that's dealing with people who are perfectly innocently searching terms such as politics, football, news. There will be some people who start off down a road and they are interested and they deliberately search for perhaps a controversial commentator that they're intrigued by. Even there, is it right that your channel then picks up on that and then essentially reinforces their path down this road by recommending further right-wing or extremist or hateful content and videos? In that sense, you know, the algorithm is deliberately trying to find what similar stuff to what they've looked for already. But how can you justify doing that?
Actually, we don't have any evidence that more extreme content is more engaging for users. Users are not interested in more extreme content. So, again, the challenge here is for specific areas like the one that you have highlighted, find product solution to make sure that the users that are coming on the platforms are finding content that is in line with our interests, of course, but is not offensive.
But you realise how frustrating this is, because, you know, I hope these products arrive tomorrow, but we can't wait for it. I mean, it's 70 or 80% of the viewing that happens on YouTube is of recommended content. This is such a significant part of the product that if this is completely wrong, then, you know, fundamentally we really have significant problems with the channel altogether.
That's why I mentioned to you the number before of 80% of the views of the BBC coming from Up Next, because it actually is a great tool for BBC and for other, by the way, broadcasters. It's a very important tool also to give visibility to authoritative sources.
But if at the same time certain extremist, hateful videos are getting up to 1 million views at a time because of the way your algorithms work, then I don't care if the BBC gets a few extra hits. My concern is that 1 million extra people have seen this content and are being pushed along a path to extremism and hate. And you know, everyone seems concerned in this panel about protecting free speech, but they don't, which is great, absolutely, but they seem less concerned about treading or pushing folk inadvertently or otherwise down a path to hatred and extremism. Why is that not just as much, if not more so, a concern as free speech and protecting?
I want to reassure you, we care about this issue, we care deeply about this issue. We want users that are coming on YouTube to have a positive experience. We want the 2 billion of users that are coming every month on YouTube have a positive experience. We want to invest in products that give more visibility to authoritative sources. Already today, if you're looking for breaking news, what you get as a result are more authoritative sources than in the past. And that's the direction that we are taking. I would be very happy to update you on the future product launches that we are planning in UK in order to make sure that you can see this as this evidence.
Final question though. I mean, ultimately, the problem here, I suppose, is also that far right are also showing themselves as being capable of exploiting your algorithms. So, for example, I don't know if you're aware of the report by the Data and Society Research Institute about the Alternative Influence Network. Have you heard of that report?
Doesn't come on top of my mind, but I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, basically, significant influencers who maybe are sympathetic to extreme right-wing views, they do bring on extreme right-wing figures. They have a nice cosy chat, don't challenge any of their views. It's all seen as nice and rebellious, and by doing that, the 1 million followers of that sort of internet personality or YouTube personality, they are suddenly directed towards the extreme individual that was invited onto that show. Do you accept that your algorithms are vulnerable to exploitation in this way?
We are also working on specific tools to give, in relation to this issue, visibility and transparency if a newsletter is state-sponsored. We are working together with the European Commission on something called the Code of Conduct to protecting the European election, where we are actually working together with fact-checkers, with third parties, in order to make sure that information can be verified, that there are ways to find solution for this problem. The message that I would like to give you is that we are aware of the issues. We are working on that. It's not on our interest to have this effect on our users, and we want the users actually to have a safe experience.
Would you be happy for an independent regulator to have oversight of your algorithms?
Absolutely. The solutions that are in the line harms are all interesting solutions. Actually, we are looking forward to provide our feedback in the context of the public consultation, but this is a direction that we have seen also in other fields. For example, the VMS directive is going in the direction of giving more power to the regulators in relation to some of the activities of our platforms. That could be actually helpful to build the trust between the industry and the institutions.
The trouble is, Mr. Vanchini, you've had this raised with your company repeatedly, this issue about your algorithms pushing people towards more and more extreme content. Yesterday, when I just did some search on YouTube for a relatively popular right-wing US YouTuber, as a result of which I then immediately had recommended on my homepage as the third recommendation another channel from somebody who has promoted racist and homophobic language. As a result, on clicking that, I now have on my YouTube channel this morning on my homepage, I'm being recommended to the first and fourth recommended videos that come up are for the former leader of the EDL, somebody who has been banned on both Facebook and Twitter. I have never searched for his videos, but they are coming up. Videos with him included in them and promoting him are coming up as the first and fourth recommendation. How on earth is that happening?
Up next, recommended
This is not
videos.
up next, this is on recommended.
No,
so
sure.
This is just coming up as recommended on my homepage, the recommended videos for me to watch.
The logic behind this product is to provide to users that have seen a specific set of content suggestions that are in line with the views with the content that was seen before.
The next thing being recommended for me was something that was more extreme than the first thing I'd looked at. The first thing I looked at was a right-wing US site. The second thing was more extreme and was clearly somebody who has included racist and homophobic language. The third thing was even more extreme and was somebody who has promoted Islamophobia and who was cited as a cause of radicalisation in the Finsbury Park attacks. How is that happening? That it's a clear example of YouTube, your platform, recommending increasingly extreme content.
This is happening in the context of speech and political speech because the logic of recommended or up next is a logic that is based on the behavior that the user had on the platform, which works for the 90% of the experience that the users have on the platform. And of course, I am absolutely aware of the challenge that these represent for specific areas like breaking news and political speech. That's why we need to work on product solution. We are working on product solution in order to
No, the only thing that
visibility.
you've talked about in your product solution is about the authority level of news. Okay, so if I search for the BBC, then I might get Sky and I might get other similar news channels. That's not about far-right extremism. I want to know what you are doing to stop your channel promoting further and further extremist material and your channel and your algorithms effectively radicalising people.
We have an approach which is very clear. So first and foremost, we look at the law. If the content is illegal, the content has to go down. If the content is against our policies, with the approach that I described before, we enforce this. But I agree that there are areas.
You're recommending it, you're promoting it.
There are
This
areas.
is not about whether or not you've got it on. Look, there is a separate question. There is a separate question for you about why you have not banned something that is currently being banned from Twitter and Facebook, and for specific reasons and evidence. But the question is, why are you promoting it?
We actually found solutions, and this is about the 30 policies that we launched in the previous year to reduce the visibility of this content. In relation to some of these examples, we have evidence that these speakers, because of the action that we took, lost a lot of visibility. And they are becoming basically...
This is pretty visible to me. I mean, it's like, seriously, it is the top... This is the top recommended video, just as a result of me searching for one channel and then clicking on another that was recommended to me. That's all I have done to get this as to be the top promoted video for me.
I'm not here to defend this kind of content.
No, but your predecessors have already said that you were supposedly doing something about this. So we raised this with you with your company in December 2017, so almost 18 months ago. And Dr. Lundblad at that point admitted, yes, clearly this does become a problem when you have content where you do not want people to end up in a bubble of hate. We need to make sure we use machine learning. That was 18 months ago, still hasn't happened. William McCants also told us 6 months later, when I asked him, and I said the same thing because at that time I had been looking for the National Action videos, and again at that point I got similar kinds of videos and extremist videos and white supremacist videos being promoted at me, and I said, does that cause you serious alarm? He said, personally, that causes me a lot of that alarm. I will take this back to our team and see why this is happening. It's important for the company and for our bottom line for the recommendation engine to work as it is intended. It should not be serving up videos that incite or inspire hate. How is that any different to what you've just said to us now? You are not doing anything about this, despite the fact that you have been warned, not just by this committee, but by law enforcement and by people across the world, not just in this country, that your algorithms are pushing people towards more and more extreme content.
In relation to the specific issues that you mentioned, on the proscribed groups, we took action. In the last year, we took down 100 of pieces of content. We have a proactive approach. We are doing exactly in line with what was the expectation that you have. Our focus is really to have an impact on this kind of content and reduce.
You're still coming back to the same thing. You're talking about removing content. I think there is a big problem with you not removing content that is extremist. But let's put that aside. That's not the question I'm asking you about. I'm asking you about what you are promoting, what you are recommending, and what your algorithms are doing. The algorithms that you profit from are being used to poison debate.
We are not. There is no intention from our side to promote speech that is an abuse of our policies. Actually, we want to force our policies against this kind of content whenever it's against our policies, whenever it's illegal. There is a series of content that is not illegal, is not against our policies.
What are you doing about your algorithms?
On the algorithms, we are making product changes in order to make sure that whenever user is searching for breaking news or for political speech, the results that they're going to get are authoritative source. We are going to make sure.
I'm not asking you about authoritative news. This is not the DCMS committee. We are not asking you very good questions about fake news. I'm asking you about extremist content and your algorithms that are promoting it.
On extremist content, we are going to tackle the visibility. Whenever a content is offensive, still not against our policies, not illegal, but offensive. We put this content in a situation where this cannot be searched, cannot be recommended, cannot be
Sorry,
commented.
it just has been recommended. This just has been recommended. Stephen Doughty.
Check. I mean, it's just absolute rubbish. Absolute rubbish from you. I mean, I when I was searching last night, it's not just the algorithms; it's your actual channels, which people are then being encouraged to subscribe to. And I've got a channel here from a well-known extreme right-wing person who used to be linked to the BNP, self-described Nazi and so on, which is just video after video on a subscriber channel with 86,000 subscribers, which is fairly high, as you know, with videos, black man throws white boy off balcony, bullied to death for being white, treason from Parliament, the media promotes anti-white violence, how the Israel lobby controls, it's video after video after video of curated content by one of your subscriber channels, okay? And the example I gave to you earlier on, that's also a subscriber channel. And it's somebody who boasts on that channel that they have closed down one of their other channels and they've opened a new one, sharing those speeches talking about niggers and faggots. I mean, what on earth are you doing? I mean, it's the algorithms, it's the channels. I mean, you're essentially accessories to radicalisation, accessories to crimes.
It's not in our business interest to have users going through this bad experience.
So why are you doing it?
First, I would really love to look into this content together with our team and come back to you with a specific answer.
This is what you say every time. This is what you say every time. We'll look at it. Oh, we don't want to do this. We don't want to do this. You're not actually taking the action.
Actually, we took action. We had 30 policy changes. The content in question, a lot of content that you mentioned today, is a content that is cannot be shared, cannot be commented, cannot.
This is being shared. This is being shared.
But that's why I want to look into the specific example that you are making in order to come back to you and give you an answer, because it's actually our responsibility to look into the comments that you made and come with specific solutions, and there are improvements. The numbers that I mentioned to you before, the fact that in relation to the worst of the violation, including some of the violation that you are mentioning, 90% of the content that we took down had less than 10 views is actually a number that shows how on the enforcement we made progress.
Okay.
In the area where...
Doesn't deal with your algorithms. Chris Green, did you want to come in on this point?
Yes, thank you. We're going through a very curious political time at the moment. In 2009, Nick Griffin was elected to the European Parliament to represent the northwest of England. There's another member of the BNP elected to represent Yorkshire and Humber. Is there any circumstance in which a member of the European Parliament or a member of the British Parliament could be banned from YouTube, Facebook or Twitter?
So any user on Twitter is subject to our rules. Something we are looking at is if there are occasions it would be helpful to have a public interest interstitial, in that there may be times when individuals in public life say something that's against our rules, and by removing it we decrease awareness of that violation, and whether it's of value to have a note saying this breaks our rules, but we're leaving it up because it's in the interest of the wider public to be aware.
In that context, I suppose it's a bit like the BBC Question Time programme. Nick Griffin appeared on it, and that actually damaged him and the reputation of the BNP, because that his performance could be seen by a whole series of people. But could you think of a circumstance where you would actually ban an MP or MEP?
Every Twitter user is subject to our rules.
And from Facebook and YouTube?
Thank you, Mr. Green. Similarly, all Facebook users in our community are subject to the rules, which raise a very interesting point for members of Parliament or others that have stood in elections, how we go about making those decisions to ban organizations, for example, Britain First, BNP, who have stood in recent elections. We take those decisions very seriously. They're very hard. I think this is a place where regulation can be helpful to give us a steer on the correct ways to operate. We want to be respectful of political speech, but we also don't want abusive users and users that subscribe to hate ideology to be on our platform. So in the case of Britain First, BNP, we've moved to ban those and all those affiliated, but we recognize it's a very difficult decision.
Yes.
Same for us. We look at every piece of content. If the content is against the law or against our policies, we take action.
Okay. Tim Lawson.
Apologies, I wasn't here at the beginning of the session, so I hope I don't repeat anything. But just to come back, Mr. Pancini, I think that you seem to be in denial that it is not just individual sites which are lingering on your platforms that we are primarily concerned about. There seems to be a systemic problem that you are actively, because of the way your sites and algorithms are structured, actively signposting and promoting extremist sites. So that theoretically, if I were to search for black boots on your site, ultimately I would be signposted to a Nazi sympathiser group in its extreme, it seems to work. And yet you don't appear to see the significance of that.
We do. We take this issue very seriously. We understand that for specific areas, there could be an effect that is not what is intended. That's why we are investing in the different areas that I described before on products in order to make sure that authoritative sources are coming coming up.
We keep coming back to authorities' sources, and we keep coming back to fact-checking. Well, I mean, some of the sites we've heard from, all Jews should be killed or black people need to be murdered. You don't need fact-checkers to see that those are completely unacceptable. So are you actually developing something where if somebody starts off by looking for extremist sites, be it in terrorism, be it extreme right-wing, left-wing, or whatever, and as a result of which they are then looking at more extremes, so there's a clear pattern of behaviour, does that flag up any warnings to your moderators that here is somebody who is looking at stuff which is clearly potentially dangerous, and therefore that would initiate action by you towards that person doing the browsing?
That's actually a very good question. Thank you, Mr. Lawton. We made some experiment together with Jigsaw, our think tank that is looking into these issues, to make sure make sure that when a user is searching for content that is extreme, we suggest also content that is going in the direction of tackling the radicalization issues in its behavior. So for specific areas, there are tools that can be put in place. There is where it's a bit more challenging, but again, with our products and our policies, we are tackling the issue, is this area between the political speech and that can become sometimes controversial. In the public debate, we have thousands of examples of this. This is where it's more challenging. This is where we are looking into products to make sure that it's not just authoritative. I want to make it very clear, it's not just about being authoritative. It's about providing different ways, for example, contextual box, making reference to sources that can help the user that is looking at a video which is reporting information that are not correct.
I don't think I understand most of that. And when we raise this on countless occasions before with another group of your predecessors, it's always we are looking into to this rather than this is actively now going to be put into force. I mean, can any of you conceive a situation, and this goes for dangerous radicalisation, political terrorism or whatever, and for people with eating disorders, and people who are self-harming, which is a particular concern I've got, that if somebody is exhibiting a pattern of behaviour, looking at sites linked to how do I kill myself, how do I harm myself or whatever, that would flag up on your platforms a warning message that then you proactively would take some action, not just throw up an authoritative source, a BBC site on slimming advice, but something that would specifically flag up that there is potentially somebody here who is going to get up to mischief to somebody else or to themselves, and therefore third parties need to be informed about it. Is that doable in any of your platforms, now or intended to be?
This is a major priority for us. You will have seen our CEO talk about looking at everything from the fundamentals of Twitter right through to our partners on the ground. Two things that I draw your attention to that we're doing. First, we have a partnership with the University of Oxford, and they're looking specifically at how exposure to a variety of different viewpoints can reduce prejudice on Twitter. Second of all, we now give all of our users the opportunity to turn the algorithm off. On Twitter, it's in the top right-hand corner of the app. You click again, and the algorithm is off. And you can see all the content just in order of the users you follow.
Mr. Lott, I think that's a great question. I think a lot of this discussion is about discoverability of content and how that you can reduce the incentive of people interacting with borderline content. We've found in our research, and every company has their own research, we found in our research that no matter where you draw the line on prohibited content and allowable content, that people tend to engage more around the borderline content. And our CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, has spoken about wanting to flip the calculus on that make it less likely that you will engage with borderline content. We can do that through algorithmic changes. We can do that through things like suggestions, where we now invest in not suggesting things that are borderline, even if they're not violating. I think, Mr. Dowdy, you mentioned a number of groups. I think those are already violating on Facebook, and so they would not be referred. But even things that come close to that, we want to flip that calculus to make sure that we're not surfacing them to you, that they stay buried, and then once we do designate that, they would be removed. Mr. Lawton, to your point about whether it's someone's searching for extremist content, someone's searching for issues around suicide and self-harm, we do a lot in that space to surface resources to those individuals. For extremist content, for example, after our white nationalism and separatism announcement in the United States, we are now redirecting individuals who search for that content on Facebook to a group called Life After Hate. It's a group of former extremists that offer resources, offer intervention for people that are searching for that. I think those are big steps. Similarly with suicide.
How many sites are you doing that for?
We're doing that now. We're partnering with Life After Hate now in the United States. We're looking to roll that program out more globally. I know here in the UK, we work with the Online Civil Courage Initiative, one of our counter-speech initiatives, where they have Hope Not Hate, they have the ISD, others that work with that group, where we think that there would be a likelihood that we offer redirection services so that we can have intervention.
Okay. How many sites are you redirecting from now?
It would be searches. It would be searches on our platform. Maybe I'm not understanding your question, sir.
Well, you are saying that if somebody is looking for these extremist sites, then they can be redirected to something that is
right.
It may be, for Mr. Pansini, an authoritative news source, but you're saying it's something that may be an antidote in some form to whatever hate extremist site they have alighted upon.
Right. It's a number of search terms, and I would have to come back to follow exactly search terms. So it's not just sites.
Well, you see, the point is we've had all this. We are looking at. We are in discussions with the Oxford University. We are dealing with all these groups. These discussions have been going on for ages. You have the personnel, the technology, and the algorithms now to clamp down on this stuff. I never cease to be amazed how many products I never knew I could live without or couldn't live without, that I'm told when I just do basic searches on any of your platforms. If you put a fraction of that effort in trying to promote the sale of goods and get the Revenue Commission from doing so, into coming up with algorithms which actively redirected people now to antidotes to hate sites, or didn't signpost them to the sort of sites that the chair has come up with, we might start to take you seriously. So let's drill down into some of your numbers, Mr. Potts. You told us just now that 15,000 of your employers are involved in content moderation. That was the figure you gave?
That's correct, sir.
Right, even though it's below the 20,000 target for 2018 that one of your predecessors indicated, and even though at the last quarter alone, your revenues went up by 61% to $16.9 billion. So there's no lack of money to invest in those people. So of those 15,000 people, how many of them are actually designing algorithms which will redirect, prevent hateful content, or react and quickly take down hateful content, actually moderating sites that come up? How many of those 15,000 are doing that rather than moderating algorithms which will try and sell me more product?
So, Michelle, I want to be clear, and I would have to check the transcript to Mr. Milner's comments. We now have 30,000 people who work in safety and security. That includes subject matter experts, whether they're in counterterror and whether they're in safety around things like suicide, safety around other health issues. We have 15,000 what we call content moderators who specifically focus on enforcing the policies. We also have, that is within that 30,000, we also have thousands of engineers who build out the algorithms. So I think the number, I'm having a little difficulty trying to parse the number for you, I want to be clear, but the 30,000, so which is obviously more than 20,000, 30,000 people who are working in this area that work together in concert across to scale all these policies to our global community. So in many ways, that I think we are not only have met the 20,000 number, we are beyond that. We have.
Okay, what are these 15,000 doing?
The 15,000 people that we speak of, they are specifically content moderators who enforce our policies based off of both user reports, based off of proactive algorithms that surface likely violating content to them. Those people are based in over 20 different offices globally, speak over 50 languages. They work on the process to ensure that the reports are being reviewed quickly, that we can enforce those within a very quick turnaround time.
So they are there purely and exclusively to remove or prevent or respond to harmful content?
They are, and to build the process to help us both scale that and be quicker in our response.
Purely dealing with harmful content?
Harmful content, whether it's in all of our abuse types. So you have abuse types such as things like spam, financially motivated bad actors, things like credible violence, things like terrorism, sharing of privately identifiable information.
So they're not all involved in harmful content if they're dealing with spam and other things like that, which are an inconvenience, but they're not necessarily harmful content.
That's a great point on the definition of what you consider to be harmful content. It's not a great point,
it's an obvious response.
Well,
you've just told me they're all 15,000 dealing with hateful content, and now you've just told me that actually a lot of them are dealing with spam, which cannot be construed necessarily as hateful content. We would just like to know what these people do. You are the first $1 trillion capitalised company in the world with an awful lot of money to employ people to be doing rather more than you're doing now to prevent hateful content, not to design algorithms which want to sell us more. I would really like to know, and I'd like to meet some of those 15,000 people to find out exactly what their job is and how proactive they are being, because time and time again you tell us what you're planning to do and it doesn't come to reality, which is why now regulation has become a thing. So I want to ask you, Ms. Mitchell, you said just now that the new regulator proposed in the white paper was a big step forward, to quote you. Why?
I think it's two things. First, in my experience at Twitter so far, there is a great deal of really good work going on, whether that's holding us to account, support services or research. Having one organisation that can coordinate and convene all that good work, I think would be particularly helpful from the perspective of users who sometimes don't know where to turn when they see issues online and don't know the differences between our policies. I think the second aspect is part of the problem here, and this is what's driving regulation, is there is a perception that tech companies like ours that have come from the West Coast are unaccountable alien organisations. Having an organisation in the UK that is accessible to the public can help to restore some of that process and accountability for British citizens. But I think I just want to clarify. I think that there's lots of ways it could be positive, but we still need more detail on the operation of the new regulator.
So you agree that you are unable to regulate yourself?
I believe that there are a number of actions we've taken over the past couple of years, particularly around the removal of terrorist content across the industry, that have had a really positive impact. And I think what would be particularly good is if the new regulation builds on that. With something like GIFCT.
It's a simple question. If you think we need a regulator to regulate your business, that must be a tacit admission that you are incapable, therefore, of regulating yourself.
Our CEO has spoken about this. He sees our role very much as educators, and that there are plenty of ways regulation could be a positive step
What
forward.
is the purpose of Twitter, anyway?
Twitter exists to show entertainment, sport and news. It's what's happening.
What's your favoured platform of social media?
Twitter.
So why have you only tweeted 6 times this year?
As part of my role as a public-facing representative of Twitter, I take quite seriously what I tweet, and that probably gives me a level of thought behind when I do tweet. But I don't think there is. I don't think there is...
Why do you only have 413 followers? Would that be a good Twitter account only to have 413 followers?
I think that's quite difficult to say, but...
well, it's not very difficult to say. Why are you not taking your own product seriously? And why are you not using it to disseminate good, responsible practice for your company? You describe yourself as working for Twitter on your Twitter account, and yet I can't find a single example of where you've actually tried to promote good practice for social media users. I'm
very happy to send you examples where I have retweeted exactly that information.
Well, I can't find any.
It's there.
How many years ago?
Within the last 6 months. Multiple
well, it's not
examples.
one of the 6 tweets you've done since Christmas, so I just don't think it's there, which I just find extraordinary that as a representative, the public policy person for a major social media company, you are not making use of your company's product in order to promote more responsible practice amongst your users.
What I would also say is we have 40% of our users never tweet, and they use Twitter on a daily basis to access content and not to tweet. There are a range of different ways our users engage with the platform.
Where do you think that perhaps Mr. Potts or Mr. Pansini here, which other countries regulate better, or do you think actually you don't need to be regulated more than you are at the moment? And what are your thoughts on having a regulator as proposed in the white paper?
So I would like to mention 2 experiences that I had in the past years in this regard. One is the European Code of Conduct. So we started to discuss this Code of Conduct, which is self-regulation, but the European Commission was heavily involved because there was a lack of trust that we could improve on the way we were dealing with the referrals that we were receiving from users and from NGOs. And we started from a very tense relationship both with the Commission and with the NGOs. And the first result of these were also not super positive. We are actually around 40% of removal rate in the 24 hours, which is the threshold. In 3 rounds of the reporting, by keep on working with the NGOs, by working on this issue, by seeing all the improvement that we put in place, we arrived now to 80% of removal rate in the 24 hours in relation to the monitoring that is happening from the NGOs on our platform on hate speech.
So are you in favour of a regulator?
That was self-regulation, just to give you an idea. Another example is the VMS. So the EU Code of Conduct, there is no regulator. It is a self-regulation. It's us working together with the NGOs. The NGOs make, for a period of time, a monitoring of our platform, send to us requests. They take note of our answers. They go back to the Commission, give the result, and the Commission publish the result. So it's a purely self-regulation. And still, this is an example of something that is working.
Okay. I'm not sure I got an answer to the question. Perhaps finally, Mr. Potts, are you in favour of a regulator, and can you signpost to any countries where you think they have tougher regulation?
Where regulators actually can help. Like, for example, in the context of the AVMS, the fact that now for specific services of our platform there will be a regulator that will be overseeing our activities is something that is positive. On GDPR and privacy, there are regulators that are working with us on data protection issues. So what I'm saying is that I think our industry can successfully regulate themselves in some specific areas and show improvement in a very transparent way, and also in other areas, or working together with regulators can be a way to build trust. So I think both the solution can be applicable to our industry.
Mr. Potts.
Mr. Loudon, first I want to say that, and assume this is the chair as well and all members of this committee, that if you would like to visit our content moderators, we are more than happy to work with you to set that up. We have a large content moderation team that sits in Dublin at our international headquarters. And in fact, we have one of our largest engineering teams outside of the headquarters, Menlo Park, that sits actually here in London. And they do much of the work that is to train the AI on finding harmful content to removal. So we're happy to set that up. I'm happy to follow up with the team after this. As far as regulation, I think we recognize that we want government to play a more active role in this space. Our CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, has spoken about 4 areas, one being harmful content, the other election integrity, privacy, and then data portability. You also asked for an example of where perhaps regulation is getting it right. I think in the context of providing certainty to any industry, both for larger companies like ours and smaller companies that are growing in this space, it is always good. GDPR may be an example of where the regulation in a harmonious framework is good. Now, every example, I would love to be able to work with our regulatory lawyers to review to make sure that we can commit to those things. But those are areas where I think we recognize the value of government and really encourage it.
Thank you.
I'll just ask you just a final few quick questions. First to Twitter. David Duke tweeted 2 days ago blaming the awful attack in Sri Lanka on the Zionist-occupied government and the Zio media. He's the former Grand Wizard of the KKK. You've banned Britain First. You've banned the former head of the EDL. Why have you not taken down David Duke?
I wasn't aware of that specific tweet. There may be a team that's already reviewing this. Let me go away and I will come back to you as soon as possible.
Well, I think there's a real concern that you just have double standards for different people, that you are not consistently removing some of this extremist content.
Like I said, let me come back to you as soon as possible.
Facebook, and I welcome some of the work that you've announced recently on removing some far-right extremists. You've said individuals and organisations who spread hate have no place on Facebook. What are you doing about closed groups and secret groups?
Thank you, Chair. Different surfaces on Facebook have different problems, and closed groups or secret groups are one of those surfaces. About 2 years ago, we started the Safe Communities initiatives to ensure that we were removing both harmful groups and content that was harmful that appeared in those groups. We're holding the group, we're not only reviewing content, whether it's user reported in those groups, we're reviewing that against with our proactive measures, with our artificial intelligence to surface, and we're also holding the group admins more accountable now. So if I was a member of the group and I was posting harmful content that violated, I would get my penalty as normal. But those penalties would also redound towards the admins of those groups. As you eclipse a certain threshold, the group, you run the risk of having the group removed. You run the risk of being able to admin or moderate other groups as well.
How do you know about those groups and what's happening, though, if you don't have users within them reporting things?
Fortunately, we do have users who, even in some of these enclosed groups, who will report things. We also do run our automated services within the groups.
Okay. Let me tell you about one closed group that I had reported to me last night. It describes itself as a direct action group. It makes a reference to me and my family and says, just shoot them, criminals. There's another reference to somebody else saying they should be shot, and then somebody else saying, kill them all, every fucking one, military coup, National Socialism, year one, I don't care as long as they are eradicated. Now, that group has over 30,000 members. The only reason I know about it is somebody sent me some screenshots about it last night. The comments are from several weeks ago, so your systems obviously haven't flagged them or haven't done anything about them. Isn't the truth that you are providing safe places to hide for individuals and organisations who spread hate?
Chair, we want to be hostile to those groups. Obviously, I'm not aware of that group. I will follow up with you directly to make sure that we review that group, remove those actors, and where appropriate, work with law enforcement on any credible threat. We've enacted a number of measures following the unfortunate incidents in this House and other targets towards other elected officials in the world, where we are now more impactful in our enforcement against violence and intimidation and incitement around members of Parliament, around other elected officials. So not only do we remove credible threats, we remove even aspirational threats. Something like someone says, I hope someone shoots them. To a normal person, maybe that is just, maybe that's puffery, maybe that is just hyperbolic statements, but we realize the position that you all are in and that those statements may turn into incitement, and we do remove those. We want to be more aggressive in that space.
What are you doing to identify them, particularly the large ones? So you've got large sites that may be promoting racism or homophobia or violent threats within those closed groups, or including within secret groups. And it's not possible for anybody else from the outside who might disagree strongly with their values to be able to see what they're doing and in order to be able to report them to you. And yet you are providing a forum for people with extreme views to escalate to organise. In this case, as I said, it describes itself as a direct action group, so to encourage others to take direct action of whatever kind.
Right, and again, we want to use our artificial intelligence, really leverage the artificial intelligence to help find that. It is the case that, as we spoke earlier, that artificial intelligence is not infallible at this state. It will never be infallible, but we will work on that to improve training, to improve the investment there, to find these groups. And once I do connect with you after this hearing, we will get that not only to the groups to remove, but also to train our classifiers.
You've had raised with you the possibility of legislation around these kinds of secret or closed groups. So you must presumably have looked at this because it's been discussed in Parliament. So surely you should be taking a more proactive approach, particularly to these groups which have got large numbers of members.
I hear your concerns, Chair, and we are going to go back and rectify not only this group, but I'll make sure that my leadership and those that I work with understand the urgency.
Okay. Look, I think the overall, you will have heard the concerns from every member of the committee, and we have taken evidence from your representatives several times over several years, and we feel like we are raising the same issues again and again. We recognise you have done some additional work, but we are coming up time and again with so many examples of where you are failing, where you may be being gamed by extremists, or where you are effectively providing a platform for extremism. You are enabling extremism on your platforms. And when Mark Rowley, who was the former counter-terror chief, said, and just used the example of the Finsbury Park attacker, had grown to hate Muslims largely due to his consumption of large amounts of online far-right material, as evidenced in court, including statements from former EDL leader, from Britain First and others. This is why it matters. There is evidence that the police and law enforcement agencies are giving us of radicalisation being done online that leads to people being hurt and people being killed. And yet you are continuing to provide platforms for this extremism. You are continuing to show actually that you are not keeping up with it. And frankly, in the case of YouTube, you are continuing to promote it. You are continuing to pursue and to promote radicalisation that in the end has huge damaging consequences to families' lives and to communities right across the country. And I mean, particularly for YouTube, I am just appalled that the answers that you have given us are no better than the answers that your predecessors gave us in every previous evidence session. As far as it seems from your organisation in particular, very little has changed. I think you can see why parliaments across the world and legislators across the world are despairing at your ability to do what you need to do to keep people safe. We hugely value the work that social media companies do, but we need you to keep us safe, and you're not doing so. Thank you very much for your evidence. Order, order.
The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended.